Imagine this. It's 1845. The British Empire is at its peak, ruling the waves and a quarter of the world's population. Yet, one great prize remains just out of reach, a phantom that has haunted explorers for centuries. The Northwest Passage, a sea route through the Arctic, connecting the Atlantic and Pacific. For Britain, finding it isn't just about trade, it's about national glory, about proving their complete mastery over the planet. This is the stage for one of history's most compelling and tragic mysteries. And at its center is one man, Sir John Franklin. Now, Franklin wasn't some young, reckless adventurer. He was 59 years old, a seasoned Arctic veteran, a former governor, a respected figure in the Royal Navy. He had faced the ice before and lived to tell the tale. He was seen as the safe, experienced choice to finally crack the code of the Arctic. So, the Admiralty spared no expense. They gave him not one, but two of the most advanced ships of the day. HMS Erebus and HMS Terror. These weren't just ordinary wooden sailing ships. They were bomb vessels, built tough to withstand the recoil of heavy mortars. Their hulls were reinforced with thick oak and iron plating, designed to smash through sea ice. They even had steam engines, a cutting-edge technology for the time, connected to propellers that could push the ships through calm waters or break up ice flows. They were basically the icebreakers of their era. And inside, it was a floating microcosm of Victorian England. The officers' cabins were stocked with fine china, silverware, and a library of over 1,000 books. They were prepared for a long journey. The ships were loaded with 3 years' worth of provisions. But this is where one of the first potential clues to the disaster lies. Tay Adobert. 8,000 tins of canned food, soups, vegetables, and meats. This was another new technology, meant to keep the crew fed and healthy. But the contract for these tins went to a supplier who was famously cheap and rushed the job. We'll come back to why that's so important later. The crew was the best of the best. 129 officers and men, hand-picked from the Royal Navy. They were disciplined, experienced, and brimming with confidence. They were the pride of the nation. As they prepared to sail, all of Britain was watching. Newspapers breathlessly reported on their preparations. The public was caught up in a wave of Arctic fever. This expedition wasn't just a naval mission. It was a national spectacle. It represented the pinnacle of British ambition, technology, and belief in their own manifest destiny to conquer the globe. In May of 1845, Erebus and Terra sailed from Greenhithe, with crowds cheering them on. They made a final stop in Greenland, where they topped off their supplies. 5 men were sent home, deemed unfit for the journey, bringing the final count to 129 souls. The last time Europeans saw them was in late July, when 2 whaling ships spotted them in Baffin Bay, waiting for the ice to clear so they could enter the legendary Northwest Passage. The captain of one whaler noted that the officers were in high spirits, inviting them aboard for dinner. Everything seemed perfect, and then nothing. Silence. They sailed into the white void of the Arctic archipelago and vanished from the face of the earth. A year passed. Then 2. Back in Britain, there was no panic at first. The expedition was provisioned for 3 years, after all. They were expected to be out of contact. But as the 3rd year came and went, a sense of unease began to creep in. Franklin's wife, Lady Jane Franklin, became a relentless force, pressuring the Admiralty, funding her own private search parties, and keeping the story alive in the public consciousness. The search for Franklin became the biggest rescue operation in history. Dozens of ships, both British and American, sailed into the Arctic, chasing rumors and fragments of information. It was a massive, desperate effort. But the Arctic doesn't give up its secrets easily. For years, they found almost nothing. It was like the 2 ships and all 129 men had simply been erased. The first real clues didn't surface until 1850. Searchers discovered the remains of the expedition's first winter camp on Beechy Island. They found 3 graves, belonging to men who had died in early 1846. But the graves were orderly, and the site was neat. There were no signs of panic or disaster. It just showed that the expedition had made it this far, wintered successfully, and then moved on. But where? The real breakthrough, a horrifying one, came 4 years later. Dr. John Reid, a Scottish explorer with the Hudson's Bay Company, was surveying a different part of the Arctic when he met local Inuit hunters. They had stories to tell, stories of a group of white men, starving and desperate, dragging a boat south over the ice. Years earlier, the Inuit had found their bodies scattered across the landscape, and they had something else: silver spoons, forks, and other items from the Franklin expedition. The most chilling part of their testimony was the evidence of cannibalism among the dying crew. When Ray brought this news back to Britain, the public was horrified. The Victorian establishment refused to believe that their heroic Royal Navy men could resort to such a savage act. They discredited the Inuit testimony and attacked Dr. Ray's reputation. They preferred the romantic image of their heroes dying stoically in the ice, not starving and desperate. But the evidence was undeniable. The search continued, now focused on the area identified by the Inuit. In 1859, a search party, led by Francis McClintock, funded by Lady Franklin, found the final, heartbreaking piece of the puzzle. On King William Island, they discovered a note left in a stone cairn. It was 2 messages in one. The first, dated May 1847, was cheerful. It said all well. It reported that the ships had wintered and were about to continue their journey. But written in the margins was a second, frantic message from a year later, April 1848. It told a completely different story. The ships had become trapped in the ice for a year and a half. Sir John Franklin had died on June 11th, 1847. In total, 24 officers and men were dead. The remaining 105 survivors, under the command of Captain Crozier, had abandoned the ice-locked ships and were making a desperate, doomed attempt to walk hundreds of miles south to a trading post on the mainland. This was the end of the road for the original searchers. They had found the crew's fate, but the ships themselves, Erebus and Terror, remained lost. The mystery shifted. What exactly went wrong? Why did the most well-equipped expedition in history meet such a catastrophic end? For over a century and a half, theories swirled. Modern science began to piece together the clues. In the 1980s, a team of scientists exhumed the bodies of the 3 men buried on Beechy Island. The bodies were perfectly preserved by the permafrost. Analysis revealed shockingly high levels of lead in their tins. This pointed a finger directly at those canned provisions. It's believed that the solder used to seal the tins was poorly applied, leaching lead into the food. Lead poisoning wouldn't kill you overnight, but over 2 years, it would cause severe physical and neurological damage, weakness, paranoia, confusion, and an inability to make sound decisions. Imagine trying to survive the harshest environment on Earth while your body and mind are being poisoned from within. This theory suggests the crew was already weakened and compromised long before they abandoned the ships. But the story wasn't over. The final chapter was written in our lifetime. In 2014, a Canadian search team, using a combination of modern sonar technology and ancient Inuit oral history, did the impossible. They found HMS Erebus, sitting upright on the seabed, in remarkably good condition. 2 years later, they found HMS Terror, even more perfectly preserved, a few dozen miles away. These sunken ghost ships are now a time capsule. Remotely operated vehicles have peered inside, revealing plates stacked neatly in cupboards, scientific instruments still in their place, and beds waiting for sailors who never returned. They offered the tantalizing possibility of finally answering the remaining questions. Were the logbooks left behind? What can they tell us about the final days? The investigation is ongoing, a slow and careful underwater archaeological project. The Franklin expedition is more than just a story of disaster. It's a powerful cautionary tale about hubris. It's a story of the clash between technological confidence and the raw, untamable power of nature. Britain sent its best men and its best technology into the Arctic, certain of victory, only to be swallowed whole. It's a mystery that took over 170 years to solve, connecting Victorian ambition, Inuit knowledge, and 21st century science. And as we continue to explore these sunken wrecks, the ghosts of the Erebus and Terror may yet have more secrets to share. September 1846. The Arctic sun hangs low on the horizon, painting the ice in hues of orange and purple. For the 129 men aboard HMS Erebus and HMS Terror, this beautiful spectacle is a death warrant. For 2 years, they've sailed under the command of Sir John Franklin, a celebrated explorer, on a quest to conquer the final, unnavigated section of the Northwest Passage. They are the pride of the British Royal Navy, equipped with the most advanced technology of their time. Steam engines, a 3-year supply of canned food, and hulls reinforced to withstand the crushing power of the ice. But technology is no match for the raw, untamable force of the Arctic. Off the coast of King William Island, the sea begins to seize up. What started as loose floes of ice quickly congeals into a solid, inescapable sheet. The grinding, groaning sound of the pack ice closing in becomes the new, terrifying soundtrack to their lives. The steam engines, so powerful in open water, are useless now. The ships, once symbols of human ingenuity and dominance over nature, are now just 2 tiny wooden specks, held fast in a frozen, white desert that stretches to the horizon in every direction. The men watch as the last channels of open water disappear, their escape route vanishing before their eyes. The grip is total. They are trapped. At first, a sense of grim determination prevails. This is the Royal Navy, after all. These are hardened sailors, many of them veterans of previous Arctic voyages. They are trained for hardship. They've faced the ice before and won. The initial weeks are spent preparing for the long winter ahead. The upper decks are housed over with canvas, creating a sheltered space. Stoves are kept burning day and night to fight off the bone-chilling cold that seeps through the wooden timbers. Routines are established, daily chores, scientific observations, and even entertainment. There are theatrical performances. A shipboard newspaper is published, and classes are held to keep minds sharp and spirits up. They are determined to wait out the winter, confident that the summer thaw will release them. But as the days grow shorter and the sun vanishes completely, plunging them into the months-long polar night, the mood begins to shift. The initial optimism erodes, replaced by a creeping dread. The world outside the ships becomes a place of profound silence and darkness, broken only by the howl of the wind and the eerie, shimmering curtains of the aurora borealis. The cold is relentless, a physical presence that finds every crack and seam. It's a cold that freezes beards solid, makes metal painful to touch, and turns breath into instant frost. The isolation is absolute. They are hundreds of miles from any other European soul, adrift in a hostile, alien landscape. The psychological toll is immense. Imagine waking up every day in a dark, cramped, frozen box, knowing that the same endless night awaits you tomorrow and the day after that. Alongside the mental strain, a more insidious enemy is at work within their own bodies. The vast stores of canned food, once a source of security, are slowly poisoning them. The tins were sealed with lead solder, hastily and cheaply applied in the rush to supply the expedition. With every meal of tinned soup and meat, the men are unknowingly ingesting small amounts of lead. The symptoms are subtle at first: fatigue, irritability, a vague sense of unease. But as the months wear on, the lead poisoning becomes more pronounced. Men become withdrawn, paranoid. Arguments flare up over trivial matters. The tight-knit camaraderie of the crew begins to fray under the dual pressures of confinement and neurotoxicity. Then there is the scurvy. Despite the massive provisions, their diet lacks fresh fruit and vegetables, the only reliable source of vitamin C. The telltale signs begin to appear: swollen and bleeding gums, hotching joints, old wounds reopening. The expedition's surgeons, equipped with the medical knowledge of the 1840s, are powerless against this ancient scourge of sailors. They see their crewmates weakening, their bodies failing them in slow, agonizing ways. The combination of lead poisoning and scurvy creates a cascade of health problems, leaving the men weak, confused, and increasingly desperate. Tensions rise between the officers and the crew. Captain Franklin, once a figure of resolute authority, grows more and more withdrawn. His second-in-command, Francis Crozier, captain of the Terror, is an experienced Arctic hand who likely harbors deep misgivings about their situation. He's seen what this environment can do to men. He knows the odds are against them. Did he argue with Franklin? Did he plead for a different course of action? We can only speculate, but the pressure in the captain's cabin must have been immense. The weight of 128 lives rests on their shoulders, and they're watching those lives slowly waste away. The winter of 1846 stretches into the spring of 1847. The sun returns, a welcome but weak presence in the sky. Hopes are pinned on the summer thaw. The men watch the ice for any sign of cracking, any hint of movement. But the summer is unusually cold. The ice that holds them captive barely weakens. It groans and shifts, the pressure making the ship's timbers creak like the bones of an old man, but it does not break. The brief, cool summer fades, and the horrifying realization dawns on them. They are not getting out. They are facing a second consecutive winter frozen in the ice. This is the breaking point. Their food supplies, once thought to be abundant, are now dangerously low. The canned goods are running out, and what's left is tainted. The men are sick, starving, and demoralized. The routines and entertainments that once held off despair now seem like a hollow mockery. The dark, polar night descends once again, but this time there is no optimism, only a grim, terrifying certainty. They are dying. The ships that were meant to be their lifeline have become their tombs. The leadership is in crisis. Sometime during this period, Sir John Franklin himself died. The official note left by the survivors states he died on June 11, 1847. His death leaves Captain Crozier in command. Faced with a dwindling, sickened crew and another unforgiving winter, Crozier makes a desperate decision. They must abandon the ships. They will trek south, across the barren wastes of King William Island, towards the Back River, hoping to reach a Hudson's Bay Company outpost hundreds of miles away. It is a plan born of utter desperation. They will have to haul heavy sledges laden with supplies, boats, and sick men across a brutal, unforgiving landscape they do not know. In April 1848, the survivors, now numbering just over 100, descend from the ships onto the ice. They leave behind the Erebus and Terror, their frozen homes for the past 19 months, and begin their march into the White Wilderness. They leave a single, cryptic note. "Hey, Cairn. Our last direct message from the expedition. It details their entrapment, Franklin's death, and their intention to head for the Back River. It ends with a chilling, understated plea. They have started for the river. We now know, from Inuit oral histories and archaeological discoveries, what became of them. Their journey was a slow, horrifying descent into madness and starvation. They fell one by one, their bodies littering the coastline of King William Island. The stories told of men who were starving, desperate, and driven to the last, unthinkable resort of cannibalism to survive. Not a single man made it out alive. The mystery of their final days would haunt the world for generations, a stark reminder of the awesome power of the Arctic and the fragility of human ambition. The great ships, Erebus and Terra, would lie silent beneath the waves for over 160 years. Their discovery in the last decade finally closing one of the greatest chapters in the history of exploration. For over 170 years, the fate of the Franklin expedition has been one of history's most chilling maritime mysteries. 2 state-of-the-art ships, HMS Erebus and HMS Terror, and 129 men, vanished into the Arctic ice. But their story didn't end when the ships were trapped. It descended into a desperate, harrowing struggle for survival on the unforgiving tundra. Today, we piece together their final, agonizing march through the haunting testimonies of the Inuit who witnessed their last days. In April 1848, after nearly 3 years locked in the ice and with their commander, Sir John Franklin already dead, the remaining 105 men made a fateful decision. They abandoned their ice-bound ships. Their plan was audacious, perhaps even delusional, to march hundreds of miles south to a Hudson's Bay Company outpost on the Canadian mainland. They would have to drag heavy lifeboats laden with supplies across a brutal, featureless landscape of ice and rock. Imagine the scene. These were Royal Navy sailors, not polar explorers. They were weakened by starvation, scurvy, and likely lead poisoning from poorly sealed food tins. Yet they loaded their sledges not just with essentials, but with a bizarre collection of heavy, useless items from their former lives. Silver cutlery, books, a writing desk, even curtain rods. It's a poignant testament to their desperation to cling to civilization, to a world they would never see again. They were marching into a white wasteland, dragging the ghosts of their past with them. Their journey was a slow, agonizing crawl. For years, the only clues to their fate came from the Inuit people of the region. These accounts, initially dismissed by British authorities, painted a terrifying picture. Inuit hunters spoke of seeing a group of desperate white men, gaunt and wild-eyed, dragging a boat south. They described them as thin and their mouths as black from scurvy. One account mentioned finding a group of Bodhies in a tent, some in sleeping bags, others sitting upright, frozen in their final moments. The most disturbing tales, however, were of cannibalism. The Inuit spoke of finding human remains, bones scored with knife marks, and skulls that had been broken open. They found pots containing human flesh. For Victorian England, this was an unthinkable horror, a stain on the honor of the Royal Navy. The idea that British sailors would resort to the last dread alternative was so shocking that the man who first reported it, explorer John Ray, was vilified for daring to suggest it. But the evidence became undeniable, as search parties, and later archaeologists, began to uncover the trail of the lost expedition. They found exactly what the Inuit had described. Skeletons were discovered scattered along the coast of King William Island, often beside the heavy sledges they could no longer pull. Forensic analysis in the 1980s and 90s confirmed the Inuit testimony. Cut marks on the bones were consistent with defleshing. The men of the Franklin expedition had been forced to eat their dead comrades to survive. Think about this psychological toll. These were men who had served together, who had shared the confines of their ships for years. Now, driven by the most primal instinct, they were forced into an act that would have shattered their minds as much as it sustained their bodies. The loneliness and the horror of their situation are almost unimaginable. They were the last men on Earth, surrounded by an endless expanse of white, haunted by what they had done and what they knew was coming. One of the most powerful Inuit stories is about a meeting with 4 starving survivors. The Inuit offered them seal meat, but the sailors, perhaps too sick or too far gone, could only gesture that they had no food and were heading south to die. This was likely one of the last interactions between the crew and other living people. Soon after, there were only ghosts. Inuit hunters reported seeing spirits, or tundra, wandering the ice. They described one spirit as a tall, giant man. Could these have been the final, delirious survivors, mistaken for supernatural beings? Or were they simply the echoes of a tragedy so profound it left an imprint on the landscape itself? The discovery of the wrecks of the Erebus in 2014 and the Terror in 2016 has opened a new chapter in this story. These ships are time capsules, perfectly preserved in the frigid Arctic water. Inside, archaeologists are finding everything from plates still stacked in their racks to scientific instruments and personal effects. Perhaps the most sought-after discoveries are written records, journals, logs, and letters that might finally tell the full story in the men's own words. What might they reveal? Did they document their decision to abandon the ships? Did they write about the horrors they faced on the march? Is there a final, desperate entry from the last man alive, chronicling the end of a proud expedition that descended into a nightmare? The final march of the Franklin crew is more than just a historical event. It's a raw, human drama about the absolute limits of endurance. It's a story of courage in the face of certain death, and a grim reminder of what happens when the veneer of civilization is stripped away by an unforgiving environment. The voices of the Inuit, once ignored, have proven to be the most reliable narrators of this tragic final chapter. They were the true witnesses to the end, the keepers of a story that continues to haunt us to this day. In 1845, 2 state-of-the-art ships, HMS Erebus and HMS Terra, sailed from England under the command of Sir John Franklin. Their mission, to finally chart the elusive Northwest Passage through the Arctic. With 129 men, canned provisions for 3 years, and the full backing of the British Admiralty, they were expected to return as heroes. Instead, they vanished. For over a century and a half, the fate of the Franklin expedition became one of the greatest mysteries in the history of exploration. What happened to those ships and their crews? The answer would lie hidden beneath the ice, waiting for the modern world to find it. The search for Franklin's lost ships was relentless. Dozens of rescue missions were sent in the years following their disappearance. but they found little more than haunting clues. A few graves on Beachy Island, scattered relics traded to local Inuit communities, and 2 cryptic notes left in a stone cairn. The first note, from 1847, was optimistic, reporting that all was well. The second, written on the same paper a year later, told a story of utter disaster. It revealed that the ships had become trapped in ice for over a year and a half. Sir John Franklin had died. 23 other men were also dead. The desperate survivors, led by Captain Francis Crozier, were abandoning the ships to attempt an impossible overland trek south to a Hudson's Bay Company post. They walked into the frozen wilderness and into oblivion. 4 generations. That was all we knew. The ships themselves were gone, swallowed by the Arctic. Theories swirled. Were the canned provisions tainted with lead, slowly poisoning the crew and clouding their judgment? Did scurvy and starvation ravage their ranks? The most chilling stories came from the Inuit, whose oral histories spoke of desperate, starving men, and even hinted at cannibalism among the last survivors. Archaeological finds later confirmed this grim reality, but the ships, the central pieces of the puzzle, remained lost. Finding them was like searching for 2 needles in a vast, frozen haystack. The search efforts never truly stopped, but they were revolutionized by a unique partnership. Canadian government archaeologists joined forces with the Inuit people of Nunavut. For the first time, modern technology was combined with traditional Inuit knowledge, or Inuit Kaujima. Generations of Inuit hunters had passed down stories of a large ship that sank in the very area modern searchers were targeting. They had seen pieces of wood, metal, and even a davit part of a ship's crane on the shores of King William Island. These stories, once dismissed by Victorian search parties, were now treated as invaluable data points. The breakthrough came in September 2014. A Parks Canada remote-operated vehicle, gliding through the murky waters of the Queen Maud Gulf, transmitted an image that made hearts stop. There, sitting upright on the seabed only 11 meters down, was a shipwreck. It was ghostly, adorned with sea life, but unmistakably a 19th-century British naval vessel. The shape of the bow, the position of the masts, everything matched. They had found The discovery was electrifying. It was exactly where Inuit oral history had said a ship had sunk. The modern sonar had finally confirmed the ancient stories. After 168 years, the flagship of the Franklin expedition had been found. The discovery of Erebus was incredible, but it only solved half the mystery. Where was its sister ship, HMS Terror? The search continued, now focused in a new area, further north. Once again, the key came from an Inuit. Sammy Kogvek, a Canadian ranger and member of the Joahaven Hunters and Trappers Association, recalled a strange memory from years earlier. While out snowmobiling on the sea ice, he and a friend had spotted a large piece of wood sticking straight up out of the ice. It looked like a mast. At the time, they took a few pictures, but thought little of it. When he heard about the ongoing search, he shared his story. His information led the research vessel, the Martin Bergman, to a previously unsearched Ariatara Bay. And there, in September 2016, Typhoon Italiano, lying in 24 meters of water, HMS Terror was in a state of preservation that stunned everyone. It was almost perfect. The ship was sitting level on the seafloor, its 3 masts broken but still present, its bowsprit intact. The ship's bell was still in place. Window panes were still in their frames. It was as if the ship had just gently settled to the bottom. This was no violent sinking. Sonar scans and later remotely operated vehicle footage revealed a scene frozen in time. Plates were stacked neatly in shelves in the officers' cabins. Desks with drawers closed, and bunks with bedclothes still folded were visible through the windows. It looked like a ghost ship, abandoned in an orderly fashion. This state of preservation is thanks to the unique conditions of the Arctic. The frigid, dark, and low-oxygen water acted as a time capsule, slowing down the natural processes of decay that would have destroyed the ships anywhere else in the world. The thick sea ice also protected them from being battered by storms for over a century. This allowed archaeologists an unprecedented window into the past. By sending small ROVs inside the wrecks, they could explore the very rooms where the crew lived and died. Inside Erebus, the scene was more chaotic. suggesting it was where the crew made their last stand before abandoning ship. But Terror was different. The tidy condition inside Captain Crozier's cabin raised a tantalizing possibility. It seemed the ship was carefully secured before it was left. Why? One theory is that a small party of men reboarded the Terror after it was abandoned, and tried to sail it to safety, only to have it sink gently in the bay where it now rests. The anchor was found dropped, hundreds of meters away from the wreck itself, suggesting it might have been used to secure the ship in the ice, and the line later snapped. So, what have these incredible discoveries told us? The forensics have confirmed the ships were indeed trapped in the ice near King William Island, just as the note said. The location of Erebus supports the Inuit accounts of a ship drifting south, with the ice before sinking. The state of Terror suggests a much more complex final chapter than a simple, desperate march to doom. Perhaps the expedition split into different groups with different strategies. Did one group stay with Terror, hoping for a thaw, while the other began the death march south? Did they try to sail again? The artifacts being recovered are slowly filling in the picture. Divers have brought up epaulets from a lieutenant's uniform, ceramic dishes, lead-sealed medicine bottles, and even a pair of hairbrushes with strands of hair still trapped in the bristles hair that contains DNA. This genetic material could one day tell us more about the crew's health, their diet, and perhaps even identify them. But for every answer, a new question emerges. We still don't know the exact sequence of events that led to the abandonment. What was the final cause of death for most of the men? While lead poisoning and scurvy were certainly factors, we can't know for sure what finally broke their spirits. And the biggest mystery of all remains unsolved. Where is Sir John Franklin's grave? The note says he died in June 1847, a year before the ships were abandoned. A was a high-ranking officer. He would have been given a formal burial, likely sealed in a lead-lined coffin and buried to sea through a hole in the ice, or perhaps on land. Despite extensive searching, his tomb has never been found. The wrecks of Erebus and Terror are more than just sunken ships. They are underwater archaeological sites of world importance. They are the final resting places of the men who served on them. The ongoing exploration is being done with the utmost respect, in partnership with the Inuit, who are the guardians of this history. Each dive, each artifact, brings us closer to understanding one of history's most compelling survival stories. The final secrets of Erebus and Terror are slowly being surrendered by the Arctic, but the ice, even in retreat, doesn't give up its mysteries idly. The search for the full story continues.